Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video episode on ForgottenWeapons.com. I am here again today at the Rock Island Auction Company, and I'm taking a look at some of the guns that they are going to be selling in their February of 2016 regional auction. And they have two examples here of Whitney-Kennedy rifles, and those are one of the lever-action competitors to the giant of the industry, Winchester, from the 1870s, 1880s, and they're particularly distinctive. You can see this funny serpentine-shaped lever, something very much different than the typical finger loop that we're used to seeing on Winchester rifles. Well, Winchester was not the only manufacturer of lever-action rifles in the late 1800s. And these rifles are one of the main competitors to them. Now, our story actually goes all the way back to like 1794 when a guy named Eli Whitney, who most Americans probably read about back in elementary school, invented a thing called the cotton gin, actually the cotton engine. It was a mechanical device for sorting and separating cotton seed from cotton fluff. And he was able to come up with this machine that would do an incredible amount of manual labor in a very short time. It was an incredible advance in technology and efficiency for the cotton industry, and Eli Whitney patented it and had this great invention and promptly went deep into debt trying to defend his patent against other people who were copying the machine left and right. This wasn't so good for him, kind of an unfortunate side effect of coming up with what was really a very fantastic idea and also a pretty simple thing to make. So Whitney's in financial trouble, and what saves him is actually an 1801 contract from the United States government to make muskets. Whitney had set up an industrial factory, and he figured he could pretty much make anything, and got his contract to make muskets, and then basically cast about to try and figure out how to learn to make muskets. And what he came up with was basically the beginning of the interchangeable parts system. He had the notion that, well, there would be a longer setup time to figure out how to make tooling and jigs and fixtures so that one worker would do one specific task over and over and over and make, say, frames or lock plates or front sights or a specific part. That would be a more efficient way to make guns than to have one guy go through and make every part in succession and then build a gun. And this worked out quite well for him. In fact, it's impressive to recognize that by 1879, for example, when these rifles were first produced, Whitneyville, the Whitneyville Armory, had been literally in business for 80, nearly 100 years, making firearms, where the Winchester Company was a relative newcomer. Winchester had been founded in the mid-1860s. So Winchester was barely more than a decade old. Whitneyville was nearly a century old. In fact, the U.S. early on had a whole system of private armories, about a half dozen of them, that were intended to supplement the production of the two national armories at Springfield and Harper's Ferry. Well, in the 1840s, they kind of gave up on that idea, and all of the privately held armories fairly quickly fell into bankruptcy and disappeared, with the exception of Whitneyville. So Eli Whitney and later his son, Eli Whitney Jr., were astute businessmen. They were very talented, what would have been called at the time mechanics, fabricators, machinists. And they wanted to compete with Winchester for rifles. You know, Winchester is this upstart that's getting all the business and all the publicity, and everyone thinks they're the hot stuff. Well, you know what? Other people can do just as well or even better. So Whitney collaborated with an inventor by the name of Andrew Burgess, who was one of the more influential and lesser-known American firearms designers. And Burgess came up with a lever-action rifle design that didn't infringe on Winchester's patent. And we'll take a look at exactly how these guns operate in just a moment. And contracted with Eli Whitney to manufacture his guns. So 2,000 of the Whitney-Burgess rifles were made in 1878, 1879. They were submitted for Army testing, but didn't end up winning. The U.S. Army it turned out, wasn't going to adopt any sort of lever-action rifle at that point. And in 1879, pretty much as soon as Whitney stopped or produced the last of those 2,000 Burgess rifles, they immediately started producing and shipping these guys, Whitney-Kennedy rifles. Now, Burgess's name really ought to be still applied to these. These still use the same basic premise as the Burgess rifle, the same basic action. What Kennedy contributed was an improved lifter or elevator to move cartridges from the magazine tube, here under the barrel, up into the chamber. And no one really knows why Burgess's name doesn't appear on these guns, but Kennedy's does. Burgess continued to receive royalty payments for the use of his patent in these rifles, but ultimately the Whitney-Kennedy would prove a much more successful design. About 23,500 of these rifles were made in a variety of calibers, although predominantly, or at least originally, in .44-40. 44-40 is the cartridge that Winchester had introduced with their 1873 lever action, which is one of the most popular at the time. And they actually called it 44 WCF, or 44 Winchester Center Fire. A lot of competitive lever guns used the same cartridge, but none of them wanted to write Winchester on their guns. So Whitney, for example, these are marked 44 cal or 44 cal CF for center fire. I believe it was Marlin actually first came up with the designation 44-40 so that they could avoid writing Winchester on their rifles, but it's all the same cartridge. At any rate, 23,500 of these things were made between 1879 and 1886. It's interesting to note that this distinctive serpentine lever only lasted until 1883. At that point, it was replaced with a much more traditional looking lever that to the naked eye looks like it came right off a Winchester rifle. So why don't we go ahead and take a closer look, and I'll show you how these work internally and a few of the other details that you can look for on them. Alright, let's start by just noting the markings here. The front half is worn away, but this would have said Whitneyville Armory, CT, Connecticut, USA, and then Kennedy. So the Whitney-Kennedy rifles are simply marked Kennedy, like that. And then back here we have our caliber marking, 44 cal. Now these are a top eject rifle, and they have a loading gate here on the side. The loading gate is locked until the lever is opened. So these rifles have a longer lever throw than a comparable Winchester, but it is kind of a smoother action. So there is the full travel of the lever all the way open, and as is typical of lever rifles, when the bolt opens here, it recocks the hammer automatically. And then this is basically a large L-shaped block. And up here, inside the action, unfortunately the side plate, there isn't a removable side plate on this gun, so it's a little difficult to show the interaction of the parts. But up here, the lever, this L-shaped block, is pinned to the bolt. So what happens is when the lever is closed, like this element we actually can see. So as the lever comes up, it pushes the bolt all the way forward, which is loading a cartridge, chambering it fully, and then the lever locks in place right here against that central bar. The firing pin is now exposed. If the lever is down, the firing pin is hidden behind that bar. That prevents the rifle from being fired out of battery. And right there, now when you pull the trigger, hammer falls, hits the firing pin, rifle fires, and then the cycle starts all over again. Alright, I do have a couple other things I want to show you on these, but I figure we'll do the rest of this on this saddle ring carbine, just because it's interesting and different. Totally different patina on the two receivers, by the way, which is interesting. Alright, so the action here is identical. This carbine is also in 44-40, aka 44 Winchester center fire. Works the same way. However, one of the things that we can take a look at are the serial numbers, which are a bit unusual on the Whitney-Kennedys. You're going to find the serial number in two places, right here on the lever and right here on the bottom of the tang. So right here on the tang we have our serial number. Now the initial production run of these were numbered all the way up to approximately 4,500, and after that they started using alphabetical prefixes. So they would then run A001 through A999 and then move to B and then to C. This is, there's some wear here, but I believe this is C645. And then on the lever, if we look right there, you will find just the number portion, so just 645. Something else to point out here is that the loading gate is locked. The elevator is in its way when the lever is closed, so it can only be reloaded when the lever is open. Then the loading gate opens up, and you have a tube magazine down there that you can fill up with cartridges. Now, looking inside the action, you can see very clearly the elevator right there. That lifts a cartridge up from the magazine tube, puts it in position so when the bolt closes, the bolt pushes it into the chamber and it's ready to fire. The Winchester rifles had a toggle lock in them with two pieces like this that would pivot down, and the lever acted as a locking piece that held these two components in line. And then when you pulled the lever down, you'd break the toggle and pull things back like that. The Whitney-Kennedy is different in that it is a two-piece bolt locking against a solid bar in the receiver. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Ultimately, this rifle, despite being successful, would drop off out of the market. In 1888, the Winchester Company purchased Whitneyville and shut it down. They bought it simply to get rid of a competitor. So that was the ultimate fate. These disappeared off the market, not because they weren't good enough, but because Winchester offered to buy out Eli Whitney and he was ready to retire. So Eli Whitney Jr. ultimately died in 1895, and that was the end of Whitneyville as a company. So if you would be interested in having either of these two particular examples, this saddle ring carbine or this full-length rifle, they are both coming up for sale here at Rock Island. If you take a look at the description text below, you'll find links to the catalog pages for both of these rifles. You can check out Rock Island's pictures, and if you're interested, you can place a bid online right through the website. Thanks for watching.